The sky over the alien jungle was red like burning fire, and the air was heavy with the smell of wet earth and strange plants as Captain Wren moved carefully through the thick trees, with a small team of human explorers, their boots sinking into the soft ground, while strange calls of unseen creatures echoed from every side, and the sound of dripping water mixed with the rustle of something large moving somewhere far ahead. And then they saw them, the alien predators, tall and lean, with skin that looked like black stone and eyes that glowed with a cold yellow light, each one standing perfectly still, as if carved from rock. Yet Wren could feel their focus locked on every human movement, and the tension in the air felt like it could crush the lungs of anyone who dared to breathe too loudly. And then the leader of the predators stepped forward, his face partly hidden under the shadows of the trees, his long arms moving like the slow rise of a tide, and his mouth open to speak, but the voice that came out was not loud. It was quiet and sharp like a knife cutting through cloth, and he asked a question that made every human in the group freeze in place. "Tell me," said, "are humans trained or wild?" And the question hung in the air like the echo of thunder. No one moved, no one answered, and Wren felt the sweat running down his back. As the silence grew heavier and heavier, the words seemed too simple, but there was something dangerous in them, something that felt like a trap, and he knew that whatever answer they gave might decide if they lived or died. The other predators stood without moving, but their eyes seemed to narrow, waiting for what the humans would say, and the jungle around them suddenly felt even more alive, with the hum of unseen insects and the slow drip of water from the massive leaves above. Wren looked to his left and saw Sergeant Vale, tense with his hand close to his rifle, but he also saw the way Vale's eyes kept darting to the predators, claws long enough to slice through armor with one swipe, and he knew that firing the first shot would be the end for all of them. So Wren stayed silent, trying to think of what the alien leader really meant, and why he would ask such a strange thing. Were they asking if humans were soldiers or civilians, or was it something deeper, something about what kind of creatures humans truly were? Maybe trained meant controlled, and wild meant dangerous, or maybe it was the other way around. Wren's mind moved through old stories of Earth hunters and prey, soldiers and survivors, and the strange ways humans had always been both builders and destroyers. The alien leader took one slow step closer, his shadow falling over Wren, and the air between them felt sharp, like broken glass. Wren could see the predator's eyes clearer now, and there was no anger in them, only curiosity, like a scientist watching a strange animal in a cage. Yet behind the curiosity there was something darker, like the quiet hunger of a hunter that had not yet decided if it would strike. The other predators shifted slightly, as if they were restless or impatient, and one of them let out a low growl that seemed to roll through the ground under their feet. Wren felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He wanted to speak, but the words refused to come. His mind kept turning over the question: trained or wild? Each version felt dangerous. He thought about how humans could follow orders and fight as one, but also how they could break every rule when survival was at stake. The predator leader tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something far away, and the motion made Wren realize how utterly silent the jungle had become. Even the insects had stopped making noise. And then somewhere deep in the trees, a sound began, low at first, but growing louder, a roar not like anything Wren had ever heard, not like any animal from Earth or the alien predators before him. It was deep and old, and it carried through the ground into their bones. The predator leader's eyes shifted away from Wren, and for the first time the alien seemed tense, his body rigid, as if the roar was something he feared. The other predators turned their heads toward the sound, their cold yellow eyes scanning the dark shapes between the trees. Wren looked at Vale and saw the same thought in his eyes. Whatever was coming, it was not friendly. The roar came again, louder, shaking loose drops of water from the leaves above, and Wren felt the vibration in his chest. The predator leader stepped back slowly, and without a word the predators began to move their bodies, melting into the shadows of the jungle until they were gone. The humans were left standing in the middle of the clearing, alone, yet not alone, because the sound of heavy footsteps began to echo from the darkness ahead, and Wren felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from the shadows, as if the jungle itself had woken and chosen them as its prey. The jungle felt alive with a new kind of silence, one that was not peaceful but heavy and waiting. The red light from the strange alien sky filtered through the thick canopy above, making the air shimmer with a dark glow as Captain Wren and his small human squad stood frozen where the alien predators had left them. The roar that had come from deep in the trees still echoed in their bones, It was not just a sound, it was a presence. It had weight, it had age, and even without seeing it, they all felt it. Was something that had ruled this land long before humans or alien predators had ever set foot here. The heavy footsteps in the distance grew closer, the rhythm slow and steady, each one like a drumbeat in the earth beneath their boots, and Rin could tell that whatever it was had no fear of being heard. It moved like a creature that had never once needed to hide. Sergeant Vale whispered for the squad to keep their weapons ready, but his voice trembled, just enough for Rin to notice Vale had been in battles before, but nothing had ever shaken him like this, and the younger soldiers kept glancing into the trees, as if the shadows themselves might reach out and pull them away. The jungle air seemed to grow thicker as a strange smell rolled in. It was sharp and metallic, but mixed with the damp scent of moss and rotting wood, and it made Rin's throat tighten. The smell was not natural. It was the scent of something alive, but not quite animal and not quite machine. Somewhere far to the left, a branch snapped under heavy weight, and then another sound came like claws dragging across bark. The humans turned in that direction, but the footsteps stayed steady from straight ahead, which meant there was more than one of them, maybe many. Rin thought of the alien predators who had surrounded them only minutes ago. They had been confident and dangerous, yet at the first roar they had vanished, and that told him one thing: these things coming through the jungle were feared even by hunters like them. A thin mist began to slide between the trees, curling low over the roots and rocks. It swirled around their boots, and Rin could feel the sudden drop in temperature. His breath came out in faint white streams, which made no sense in this hot, humid place, and that wrongness only tightened the knot in his chest. Private Henley muttered that he saw something move ahead, but before Rin could ask what he meant, the mist shifted, and the shape of a tree trunk seemed to pull back into the darkness as if it had never been there. Vale ordered the squad to close ranks. The sound of the heavy footsteps was closer now, and with it came a low rumble, not a roar, but a kind of deep growl that seemed to roll through the ground itself, and Rin felt the vibrations in his ribs and in the grip of his weapon. He could not see it clearly yet, but he could tell it was large, very large. From somewhere high above there came a sudden rush of movement, branches snapping in quick bursts and leaves raining down. Rin looked up just in time to see a blur leap from one massive tree to another, and the speed of it was unreal, too fast for the eye to follow. The humans shifted uneasily, watching the treetops as much as the forest floor, and then a figure appeared ahead in the mist. At first it was only a shadow, tall and broad and still, but as it stepped forward, Rin saw faint lines of glowing blue across its chest and shoulders, like veins of light running under thick armored skin. Its head was low, its arms long enough that the clawed hands brushed the ground. When it walked, its movements were slow, but each step made the earth tremble. It was joined by another, then a third, then more shapes began to form in the mist, until Rin counted at least 6 of them moving in a loose circle around the humans. The creatures did not attack. They kept their distance, pacing just outside the range of the humans' rifles, watching with eyes that caught the red light of the sky and turned it into a cold silver glare. Rin realized they were hurting them, pushing them toward a place deeper in the jungle. One of the soldiers suggested firing a warning shot, but Vale shook his head hard and mouthed the word no, because if the alien predators feared these creatures, then shooting first might be the same as signing their own death orders. Rin tried to keep track of every moving shadow, but the creatures were fast slipping between trees and mist so quickly it was impossible to know where each one would be from one moment to the next. Then from the far edge of the circle came a sound unlike the others. It was a voice, deep and smooth, speaking words in a language Rin did not know, but the tone was clear. It was not a threat, it was a question. The creature stepped forward into the open, its silver eyes locked on Rin, and it repeated the words more slowly this time, and Rin froze, because even though the language was alien, the sound of it seemed to twist in his mind until he understood what it meant. Are humans trained or wild? The same question the predator leader had asked moments earlier, the same dangerous weight in every syllable. The squad looked at Rin, expecting him to answer, but his throat felt dry, his mind racing through the same thoughts he had before about the meaning of the words. Trained might mean safe to control, wild might mean dangerous, but both could be the wrong answer. He wondered if the alien predators and these creatures were enemies or allies, if this question was part of some ancient rivalry, or a test the humans had been dragged into without knowing it. The creature waited in perfect stillness, but its silver eyes never blinked, and its clawed fingers flexed slowly, as if testing the air for weakness. Rin could feel the squads, nerves breaking. Henley's hand shook on his rifle trigger. Vale's jaw clenched so tight the muscles stood out in sharp lines. The mist curled higher, now up to their knees, and the cold of it was like ice. Somewhere far behind them the roar came again, louder and closer, and for the first time Rin saw the silver eyes shift toward the sound and narrow. The creatures broke their circle, not fleeing, but turning to face the direction of the roar, and in that moment Rin realized they were not here to hunt the humans, at least not yet. They were here because something else was coming, something even they considered worth their attention. One of the creatures turned back to Rin and spoke again. This time the words were clear in perfect human language. Are humans trained? Or while the voice was deep enough to vibrate in his chest, and the question felt heavier now, as if the answer would shape whatever came next. Before he could answer, the trees ahead split apart, with a force like an explosion, the ground shaking under a wave of raw power, and from the darkness beyond the mist a massive shadow surged forward, larger than anything Rin had seen before. The air filled with the stench of hot metal and rotting flesh, and the creatures around them tensed in unison, ready to strike, but not at the humans. Their silver eyes locked on the thing breaking through the trees, and Rin understood the truth. Whatever this was, it did not care if they were trained or wild, because it had come to kill them all. The moment the massive shadow burst through the trees, the air seemed to split apart under the force of its arrival. The mist swirled violently, as if pulled by invisible claws, and the sound it made was not a roar this time, but a low, drawn-out hiss that seemed to slide into the bones of every living thing. In the clearing, Captain Rin felt the ground tremble under its weight, and the smell of it was so strong it made his eyes water, a mix of blood, smoke, and something ancient that his mind could not name. The silver-eyed creatures that had circled the humans a moment before moved in unison. Now their bodies, low, their claws extended, the silver glow in their eyes burning brighter as they fanned out to meet the newcomer. But even they did not rush forward. Instead, they seemed to wait, watching for an opening, as if they knew attacking too soon would be a fatal mistake. Rin could not see the thing clearly through the twisting mist, only its size and the glint of what might have been teeth, each one long and jagged, catching the red light of the alien sky for a heartbeat before vanishing again behind the vapor. The soldiers in Rin's squad pressed together, instinctively, weapons raised, but the sense of being surrounded never left them, because even as the giant shape moved ahead, smaller movements flickered in the shadows to the sides, as if other things had come with it, moving silently and quickly, staying just out of sight. Rin's heart pounded, and he kept turning his head, trying to track them, but the mist and the red light played tricks, making shapes where there were none, and hiding shapes where danger was real. The silver-eyed leader stepped forward, now its head tilting slightly as it studied the great shadow ahead, and then, without looking back, it spoke a single word in that deep, vibrating voice. The other silver-eyed hunters moved immediately, breaking into two separate groups, one slipping off to the left and the other to the right, leaving Rin and his squad exposed in the open, as if they were bait. Rin wanted to call out to Vale to order a retreat, but he knew there was nowhere safe to run the roar from. Earlier had been terrible, but this hiss was worse, because it carried thought behind it, like the mind of something intelligent and hungry and patient, and the idea of patience in a predator chilled him more than the thought of speed. The mist thinned for only a moment, and in that gap Rin saw them, the eyes, not just one pair, but many dozens, floating in the darkness between the trees. They were not all the same, some high above like the eyes of something towering, others low to the ground, glinting with a predator's focus. They blinked in strange rhythms, some fast, some slow, and the colors varied from pale yellow to burning red and cold blue, each one fixed on the humans, as if measuring them, weighing them, deciding when to move. Vale swore under his breath and tightened his grip on his rifle, but Rin caught the slight tremor in his hands. Even Vale, who had faced alien war beasts before, was shaken. The sound of movement came again from above, branches bending under heavy weight, and leaves drifting down like falling ash. A shape darted between the treetops, so fast it left only a blur behind. Rin's eyes followed the motion, but another movement caught his attention at ground level, a low, slinking shadow weaving between the roots of the giant trees, coming closer. With each heartbeat, Henley raised his weapon, but Rin hissed at him to wait. Not yet, not until they could see it fully. The shadow froze as if it had heard them. Then slowly two golden eyes opened within it, the glow soft yet steady, and Rin knew those eyes were locked on him specifically. Without warning, the golden-eyed creature spoke, its voice low and smooth, the words sliding into Rin's mind. Even though its mouth barely moved, it said, "Not them, not yet." And the meaning was clear enough. It was speaking to the other shapes in the dark, telling them to hold back. The hairs on the back of Rin's neck rose as the creature shifted closer, revealing more of its form, tall, lean, its limbs too long for its body, claws curved like scythes, catching what little light reached. The forest floor, the rest of it, was covered in dark plates that seemed to drink in the glow around them, making it harder to focus on its exact outline. Behind them, the great shadow moved again, this time stepping closer into view, enough for Rin to see the broad chest, the deep ridges along its skull, and the rows of sharp teeth, each longer than a human hand. It had no eyes that he could see, only smooth dark skin where they should have been, yet somehow he felt its gaze like a weight pressing against him. Vale muttered that it was smelling them, feeling for weakness, and Rin suspected he was right. The air between them was tense, almost brittle, as if one wrong move would shatter it and bring all the hidden shapes crashing forward at once. Then the golden-eyed creature tilted its head and repeated the question that had been haunting them since the first alien predators appeared. "Are humans trained or wild?" The words hung in the cold mist, each one slow and deliberate. The voice carried neither threat nor kindness, only the weight of curiosity, like a scientist waiting for data. Rin felt every eye in the jungle turn toward him, the silver-eyed hunters, the golden-eyed stalkers, even the massive shadow ahead, all waiting for his reply. His mouth was dry, his chest tight, and he knew that any answer would change what happened next in ways he could not predict. He opened his mouth to speak, but before the words could leave his throat, the hiss from the massive creature deepened into something worse, a kind of rattling growl that made the leaves around them shiver and the ground vibrate. A sudden rush of movement came from the left, a blur leaping between trees and landing behind one of the silver-eyed hunters, claws flashing in the dim light. The hunter let out a sharp cry, but did not fall. Instead, it twisted its body unnaturally fast, slamming into the attacker with enough force to crack the trunk of a tree. Rin barely had time to process this when more shapes poured from the darkness, dozens of them, golden-eyed, red-eyed, blue-eyed, all racing in tight arcs through the mist, weaving between trees as if they had trained for this moment. Gunfire erupted from somewhere to his right. Vale had opened up with short, controlled bursts, trying to keep the nearest creatures from closing in, but it was like trying to hold back a tide. Rin shouted for the squad to form a tight circle, and they moved quickly, each man and woman covering a different angle. But even then the shadows kept closing, the mist now a living wall of cold around them. The golden-eyed creature that had spoken to Rin before leapt onto a nearby branch, its voice carrying again above the chaos, "Not them, not yet." And at that command, several of the attacking shapes slowed their advance, circling instead of striking. The massive shadow in front of them lowered its head, the hiss turning into a sound almost like a laugh, low and cruel, and Rin knew with absolute certainty that whatever was about to happen would decide if any of them walked out of this jungle alive. The golden-eyed creature crouched on the branch above the humans, its gaze locked on the massive eyeless beast that had stepped from the mist, its voice still fresh in Rin's mind, "Not them, not yet." And though those words should have brought relief, they only deepened the tension in his chest, because if they were not the target now, it meant they might still be later. The silver-eyed hunters regrouped quickly, their lean bodies moving with sharp precision as they spread out to flank the eyeless giant. Yet none of them made the first strike. Instead, they shifted back and forth, like waves testing the edge of a shore, while the golden-eyed creatures remained in the shadows, high and low, surrounding the clearing, in a living wall of quiet threat. Rin could feel every soldier in his squad trembling, not from fear alone, but from the raw energy in the air, as if the jungle itself held its breath. The eyeless giant took another step forward, its claws dragging furrows in the earth, its head tilting slightly, as if it could hear the heartbeat of every living thing around it. The hiss that rolled from its throat was longer, now carrying a low rumble that made Rin's stomach twist. Vale glanced at him, eyes asking silently what the plan was, but Rin had no answer, because every instinct told him that firing on this thing, without knowing its limits, would be suicide. The golden-eyed leader moved along the branch above them, almost gliding from one trunk to another, its voice cutting through the cold mist with deliberate weight. "Are humans trained or wild?" The same question again, yet now it felt sharper, as if the wrong answer might not only doom them, but also shift the balance of the standoff in ways he could not foresee. Before he could decide how to respond, a silver-eyed hunter to their left let out a piercing cry and lunged, its claws flashing toward the eyeless beast. But the giant moved faster than its size should allow. One massive arm swung in a brutal arc, knocking the attacker aside. Like a broken toy, the silver-eyed body crashed into a tree, with a crack that sent leaves and bark raining down, and then the eyeless beast stepped forward again, closing the gap. The remaining silver-eyed hunters surged in a coordinated strike, claws raking at its sides, but the giant's skin was thick and dark like stone, and their blows left only shallow marks. The golden-eyed creatures dropped from the trees, landing silently around the humans, but not touching them. Instead, they moved past, weaving between soldiers, with impossible speed, to join the fray against the eyeless beast. It was chaos without sound at first, only the thud of impact and the hiss of breath. But then the air exploded with noise as one of the golden-eyed creatures was caught in the giant's jaws and torn apart, the sound of ripping flesh mixing with the growls of the others. Vale shouted to keep the formation tight, but movement flickered at the edges of Rin's vision, shapes slipping between trees that were not silver-eyed and not golden-eyed either, smaller but faster, with pale glistening skin and mouths too wide, filled with needle teeth. These newcomers darted into the fight, snapping at anything they could reach, biting silver-eyed and golden-eyed alike. Rin realized then this was not two sides, but three, maybe more, each with its own reasons for being here, and humans stranded in the center of it all. Henley opened fire on one of the pale-skinned attackers, the bullets tearing through its thin flesh and sending it tumbling back, but more replaced it in seconds, climbing over roots and each other. With a kind of frantic hunger, the golden-eyed leader landed on the ground beside Rin, its tall form towering over him, claws dripping dark blood from one of the pale creatures it had just torn apart, and in a voice colder now it repeated, "Are humans trained or wild?" And Rin felt something shift in its tone, as if it already suspected the answer and was only asking to confirm. Before Rin could speak, Vale broke in with a sharp, "Wild, we fight like hell." And that was all it took. The golden-eyed leader's head snapped toward Vale, studying him for the briefest second, and then it let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a snarl, and leapt back into the melee, tearing into the pale creatures with renewed ferocity. The silver-eyed hunters seemed to take this as some kind of signal, because they too began to fight harder, their movements no longer defensive but aggressive, driving the eyeless beast back step by step. Yet the giant resisted with monstrous strength, swiping and biting with a speed that made it almost untouchable. The humans held their ground, but the circle was tightening, pale creatures darting closer every time a soldier fired or reloaded. Rin smashed the butt of his rifle into one that lunged for his leg, feeling the crunch of bone under the blow. Vale dragged Henley back from the snapping jaws of another, and somewhere behind them Private Juno screamed as one of the pale things got past her guard, dragging her toward the trees. Rin spun and fired without thinking, the burst catching it in the throat and dropping it cold in the mud. But more were coming, always more. The golden-eyed leader vaulted back toward Rin, landing so close he could smell the metallic tang of alien blood on its breath. Its silver eyes locked on him now, as if all the other fighting had faded into nothing. It said one last time, "Are humans trained or wild?" And in that instant Rin saw something in its gaze, not just curiosity, but a calculation, as if the fate of the humans in this jungle hinged entirely on his answer. He took a breath, his mind flashing through every moment humans had fought to survive, from the first stone tools to the black void of space. He thought of the discipline of armies, the chaos of riots, the instinct to adapt and overcome. And then he spoke, not trained, not wild, something else. The golden-eyed leader's gaze held his for a heartbeat, then it tilted its head slightly and turned away, shouting something in its own language that carried above the noise of battle. The golden-eyed creatures shifted their formation, suddenly forming a loose wall between the humans and the eyeless beast. The silver-eyed hunters fell back toward the same line, as if obeying an unspoken command. The pale creatures shrieked in frustration, clawing at the barrier, but the combined force of silver-eyed and golden-eyed tore them apart. The eyeless giant seemed to study this new arrangement for a long moment, its hiss fading into stillness, and then, without warning, it turned its massive body and melted back into the mist as silently as it had arrived. The pale creatures scattered with it, vanishing into the darkness between the trees. The jungle slowly regained its low hum of distant calls and dripping water, but the air remained tense. The golden-eyed leader turned to Rin one last time and said, "The wrong prey lives today." And then in A blur, it was gone into the trees, leaving only the sound of rustling leaves, and the uneasy knowledge that the hunt was far from over. The jungle was quiet again, but the silence was heavy like a weight pressing down on every soldier's chest. Captain Rin stood at the edge of the clearing watching the place where the eyeless giant and the pale creatures had vanished into the darkness. The trees swayed slowly under the alien red sky, but there was no wind, only the faint echo of footsteps long gone, and the strange question that kept ringing in his mind: trained or wild, he had answered with words that were neither but. Now he wondered if that answer had been enough, or if it had only made things worse. Sergeant Vale moved beside him, his face hard and unreadable, but Rin caught the tight line of his jaw, and the way his eyes never stopped scanning the shadows. Vale broke the silence with a low voice, saying, "Humans are unpredictable, and that makes us dangerous more than training or wildness." Vale was right. The humans had fought with everything. They had thrown themselves into the chaos of battle with raw instinct and fierce will, but they had also fought with discipline and strategy learned through years of drills and wars. The truth was a complicated mix, something that could not be simply placed into two words. Rin thought about the first time he had held a weapon on Earth, when fear had made his hands shake, and the first time he had taken a life, when the world had shifted forever in his mind. He thought about soldiers who followed orders without question, and those who broke every rule to save their comrades. He thought about the hunters and the survivors and the leaders who had stood alone against impossible odds. The humans were all of these things, and more, a puzzle, even to themselves. The squad gathered around a small fire, where Private Henley was cleaning his rifle, his hands moving carefully, but his eyes distant. Rin joined them and looked at each face illuminated by the flickering flames. They were tired, bruised, and uncertain, but still alive, and that was something the jungle had not promised them. A voice broke the quiet. It was from Juno, who had been silent since the fight. Her eyes fixed on the fire, she said, "Maybe the question isn't what we are, but what we want to be." And Rin felt a spark of something in her words, hope maybe, or a challenge. The golden-eyed creatures and the silver-eyed hunters had not returned, but their presence was like a shadow over the squad. The knowledge that they were still out there watching, waiting, judging, and the jungle itself seemed to close in around them tighter and darker. The question, trained or wild, had become a key that might open a door or lock it forever, and Rin knew that soon they would face it again. Suddenly a soft sound came from the trees, a rustling that made everyone tense. Rin raised his hand, and the squad froze, waiting, but it was only a small animal, a creature with bright eyes that watched them for a moment before disappearing into the underbrush. And yet that brief moment felt like a reminder that even here in this alien world, life found a way to survive and adapt. Rin looked at the stars beginning to appear through the breaks in the red canopy and thought about the vastness of space and the fragility of their mission. They were explorers, but also warriors caught in a game far older than themselves, and he wondered if the aliens had asked the question, trained or wild, because they were searching for something they had lost or feared to lose. As the fire died down, Rin thought about what he would say if the question came again, if the golden-eyed leader returned and asked once more what humans were. He realized that the answer might not be simple, but it had to be honest. It had to hold the truth of their history and their future. The humans were not just soldiers or animals. They were something in between, a force that could be shaped but never fully controlled. The night deepened and the jungle whispered around them, but Rin's mind was clear. The question was no longer just about survival, it was about identity, and the answer would change everything. The jungle was alive again, but this time it was different. The sounds of creatures moving fast and the crack of breaking branches filled the heavy air. Captain Rin and his squad stood with weapons ready, their muscles tight and senses sharp. The memory of the question, trained or wild, still echoed, but now there was no time for answers, only action. The golden-eyed creatures had vanished, but their warning lingered like a shadow in every heartbeat. The alien predators had not returned either, and the eyeless giant was nowhere to be seen, yet the feeling of being hunted never left them, like invisible eyes tracking every step. Suddenly the quiet shattered as a figure exploded from the underbrush, crashing into Private Henley, who barely had time to raise his rifle before the creature's claws sank into his shoulder. Henley screamed, and the squad opened fire with the fury born of pure survival instinct. Bullets tore through leaves and flesh, but the attacker was fast, moving like a shadow between the trees, and more were coming. Rin shouted to hold the line, but even as they fired, the creatures slipped past them, darting between Soldiers biting and clawing with wild fury Vale dragged Henley back, shouting orders, while Juno fired with deadly precision, trying to keep the creatures at bay. The humans fought with everything. They had no plan, just raw power, and desperate will their bodies, moving on instinct alone, breaking formations, and fighting as individuals, in a chaotic dance of life and death. The creatures were relentless and brutal, but the humans were unpredictable. Their wildness was a weapon no alien could control, and it made the hunters hesitate. The red sky above seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the battle, lighting the jungle in blood and fire. The air was thick with sweat and the sharp smell of blood and fear. Rin found himself face to face with one of the golden-eyed creatures. It was taller than any human, but smaller than the eyeless giant, its silver eyes cold and unreadable. It spoke in a voice that was both a question and a challenge. Are humans trained or wild? Rin looked into those eyes and felt a fierce pride burning inside him. He shouted wild, and then with a roar charged forward, his rifle swinging like a club. He hit the creature hard, and it stumbled, but recovered quickly and counterattacked. The fight was brutal and fast with neither side giving ground. Rin could feel the wildness rising inside him, the ancient human fire that had driven warriors for thousands of years, the need to survive and to protect the pack. Around him the squad was fighting their own battles, some wounded, some standing strong, but all refusing to give, and the creatures attacked with sharp claws and teeth. But the humans used their weapons and their strength and their will to push back. The jungle itself seemed to join the fight, with vines twisting around limbs and trees crashing down to block paths. The battle became a fierce storm of movement and noise, and every second was a test of endurance and courage. The golden-eyed leader appeared again, moving through the chaos with deadly grace, its voice carrying above the din. Once more, are humans trained or wild? And this time the question was not just words, it was a demand, a test of what the humans really were. Rin met the gaze without hesitation and shouted wild again. The words felt like a declaration, a promise to fight to the last breath. Suddenly the ground shook violently, and from above a massive shape dropped into the clearing, the eyeless giant, returning with a roar that split the air and sent creatures scattering in all directions. The hunters and the humans alike turned to face this new threat, but the wildness in the humans was different. It was raw and fierce, and it gave them strength. They fought side by side with the alien predators, their weapons and claws tearing into the giant as it struck out with deadly force. Rin dodged a swipe of the giant's claw and fired into its exposed side. The creature howled and turned toward him, but before it could strike, the golden-eyed leader intercepted with a savage attack, forcing the giant to back off. The battle raged with no clear winner, each side testing the limits of the other, and Rin felt a strange sense of connection to the alien hunters as they fought a common enemy. It was a wild dance of survival and power, and the jungle echoed with the sounds of life and death. As the giant staggered, it let out a final roar and melted back into the shadows. The smaller creatures vanished after it, and silence fell again, but it was not the peaceful silence of before. It was the heavy quiet of those who have fought and survived. Rin and his squad stood breathing hard, their bodies battered, but their spirits unbroken. The jungle was watching, still waiting for the next move, and Rin knew the fight was far from over, but tonight the wild had been unleashed, and it had won. The jungle was darker now, shadows stretching long across the ground as the alien red sky began to fade into a deep blue, but the tension in the air was as sharp as ever. Captain Rin and his squad moved cautiously through the thick trees, every muscle tense, every sense alert after the brutal fight with the eyeless giant and the wild creatures. The humans were tired, bruised, but alive, and something new had come, the feeling that this was not the end, that something worse was still waiting beyond the trees. And then, without warning, the ground shook again, a heavy, slow pounding that vibrated through the roots and rocks, and Rin knew immediately that it was not any creature they had faced before. It was bigger, older, and hungrier. The squad stopped and looked around, searching the darkness for the source of the sound, but all they could see was the thick mist curling like smoke between the trees, and then from the shadows above something dropped, a shape so large it blocked out the red light for a moment, and landed with a crash that shook the earth. The sound of breaking branches and snapping would echo through the jungle, and Rin felt the shockwave in his bones. The massive figure rose from the wreckage, towering higher than any creature they had seen. It was covered in thick armored plates that shimmered dark green and black, and its eyes glowed a fierce orange, like burning coals. The alien predators and the wild creatures from before had vanished at its approach, as if they knew this was the true terror. The squad tightened their formation, weapons raised, but the presence of the beast was overwhelming, a cold dread filling the air, as if the jungle itself feared what had arrived. Rin felt the question trained or wild echo once more in his mind, but now it seemed small in the face of this nightmare. The massive beast roared a sound that shook the leaves off the trees, and the ground trembled again as it moved forward, its heavy steps making deep impressions in the earth. It was a hunter, but not like the others. It was a force of destruction, a storm made flesh and steel, and it wanted them all. The golden-eyed leader appeared at Rin's side suddenly, its silver eyes flashing with a new kind of fire, and for the first time Rin saw something like respect in its gaze. It said, simply, "This is the real enemy," and without waiting another second it charged forward into battle, alongside the humans, the alien predators, and the wild creatures from before joined too, their old rivalries forgotten in the face of this greater threat. The jungle exploded with violence as the massive beast struck with crushing blows. But the humans and their strange allies fought back with everything they had, their weapons, claws and teeth tearing into the armored plates and refusing to fall. Rin found himself fighting side by side with the golden-eyed leader, its movements deadly and precise, while Vale and Juno covered the flanks, keeping the smaller attackers at bay. The massive beast roared again and swung a powerful arm toward Rin, who barely dodged in time, firing his rifle into a gap between the plates. The beast staggered, but did not fall, and the battle became a test of will and endurance, every second filled with the chance of death, but also the chance of victory. Amid the chaos, Rin shouted to his squad to hold the line, pushing through the fear and exhaustion, the wildness inside him burning brighter than ever. The golden-eyed leader turned to him, and for a moment their eyes locked, and Rin felt a strange bond forming between human and alien hunter, a silent understanding that they were fighting for something bigger than themselves. The question, trained or wild, no longer mattered, because in this moment they were simply survivors, warriors, united by the fight. The massive beast made one last desperate attack, smashing a tree and sending debris flying, but the humans and their allies closed in. It was a furious final battle, the ground shaking with every blow, and the air thick with the sound of battle cries and growls. The beast let out a terrible roar and finally fell, its body crashing to the ground with a thunderous impact, and the jungle seemed to exhale, as if releasing a breath it had held for too long. The smaller creatures scattered into the shadows, and the alien predators and golden-eyed hunters disappeared into the trees, leaving the humans alone in the clearing. Tired but victorious, Rin looked around at his squad, their faces marked with dirt, blood, and relief, and he knew that the jungle had changed them forever. The question, trained or wild, was no longer a test, but a truth about the strength that came from being both unpredictable and disciplined, a force that could not be controlled but also could not be broken. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Rin raised his rifle and whispered to the jungle a promise that humanity would survive and fight no matter what came next. And somewhere deep in the trees, a single silver eye blinked, watching, waiting. But this time it was not a threat, it was a sign that the story was only just beginning.